Today we're at a member's dahlia garden and we're going to demonstrate how to plant dahlias. I'm looking forward to getting a good start with our plants. Okay, so there are two ways to plant dahlias. Normally you don't want to begin planting until the soil temperature is at least 60 degrees. And here in Michigan that's typically going to be around the middle to the third week of May. And some people like to plant their tubers directly into the ground, and this can be done, and the only trick of course is waiting until the soil is warm enough. You can begin by digging a hole about 6 inches deep, and it's a good idea to loosen the soil at the bottom of the hole, and then you can take a handful of worm castings and sprinkle in there. And a lot of people, it's a good idea to sprinkle a little Osmocote, a time-release fertilizer. You can then kind of mix this around in the soil. And then if you take the tuber with its sprout, you can place it, lay the tuber flat, and put the sprout against your stake. And then you don't want to fill this hole in completely. All you really need to do is add enough dirt just to cover the tuber, and this will allow the tuber to warm more quickly and to begin growing more quickly. And as the plant begins to grow, you can gradually fill in this hole, and this is a way to speed up the growth process early in the year, particularly when it's much cooler. And this is a method that many people use, and it's very simple. And all you need to do is start with a tuber that has a good eye on it that you can see, and plant it that way. It's also possible, as we've shown before, to start plants indoors in small pots, and then typically when there's no danger of frost, it's possible to plant these plants directly in the ground. And as you can see, this plant is going to have a much bigger head start on the tuber that we just planted in the ground. This plant here is clearly going to flower much earlier in the year, and that's the big advantage of planting a plant. The other advantage, of course, is in case your tuber rots or doesn't grow, it's going to take you a couple weeks before you find that out. Here, if your plant dies, you can immediately pull it out and replace it with another one. When planting a plant, it's pretty similar to planting any potted perennial that you might buy. Again, you're going to simply dig a hole, and the hole should be big enough to accept the root ball, which you can easily determine by putting the plant in. And when you're planting a plant, usually it's a good idea to leave at least the top pair of leaves, leave it about an inch above the ground. You don't want the leaves touching the ground, and so that's pretty much the depth. Again, you can take some worm castings and sprinkle in the hole. You can sprinkle some Osmocote, a time-release fertilizer, mix it up, and then take your plant. You can see that this tuber has developed a nice root ball. Simply place it in. Again, you want to place the stem of the plant near the stake, and then simply fill in the area around it. And then in both cases here, you would then want to water these very well. So after planting, it's also a very good idea to tie the plant to the stake to give it some extra support. And it's an easy thing to forget to do, but it's something that you will be very happy you did on the first windy day before the plants get a chance to stabilize and build up some strength in their stems. So don't forget to tie them after you plant them. So here's a plant that was started as a tuber directly in the ground, and you can see now that it's beginning to grow. At this point you can gradually start filling in around the plant, and eventually, you know, you probably will get the dirt at ground level. But this is the next step if you were going to plant the tuber directly in the ground. So at the beginning here, after you've just planted them, you want to make sure that you keep an eye on them and keep them well watered. In some areas, obviously, there are potential for small mammals like rabbits, and so it's not a bad idea to put some kind of a protection around them to keep the rabbits off. In areas where you might have a slug problem, it's a good idea to sprinkle some slug bait around them, because at this early stage you want to give them the best chance you can to start growing and establish themselves. So the idea is to keep them well watered and keep anything from eating them. Okay, when planting the tubers early in the year directly in the ground like this, certainly after you plant them, you want to give them a good watering, but they're probably not going to need very much water until you actually see them starting to grow. If you overwater them, particularly when it's cool, you will increase the chances that the tuber could rot. So you want to make sure the soil is moist, but you probably are not going to need to water it all that often. After planting a plant like this, again, you're also going to want to water it well to allow the soil to pack around your root ball. And you know, a big plant like that is probably going to need to be watered more frequently early on, before allow the roots to die back and heal in and be able to start feeding the plant. Remember that the first step in getting good quality blooms is to stop the plant. And what stopping the plant refers to is removing the apical meristem, or the growing tip of the plant. And what this will do is cause branches to form, or laterals, at each of the axils, or the point where the leaf joins the stem. Now, depending on the size of the flower, that will determine how many laterals you would like this plant to eventually develop. Now, this plant here happens to be an A size, so this is 8 to 10 inches. And typically for an A size flower, you don't want to allow more than 4 laterals to develop at any one time. And so normally what you would want is to allow at least 3 sets of leaves. So this would be 1 pair, there's a second pair, here's a third pair, and here's a fourth pair. So normally you would stop this plant when it had between 3 and 4 sets of leaves. And the stopping is a simple matter of reaching in and removing that little growing tip. What that will do, this tip was releasing hormones that were going down and causing the little developing buds at the base of each of these leaves to develop into another stem. And so by removing that tip, we've now are going to allow all of these buds to develop. Now, all of them probably will not develop, but you will probably get 5 or 6. And once you see which ones are going to grow, then you want to remove those until you only have 4. and there's no way of knowing how many are going to form, whether each one of these will form or whether you have to wait. So once you've removed the tip, just keep an eye on it and eventually allow only 4 of those laterals to come up. Here's an example of a plant that was not stopped, and you can see that we've got 3 flowers developing on the end of the plant. The center flower is farther along, and it will certainly be buried by the 2 flowers on either side. Here's a plant that was correctly stopped, and you can see that there are 2 lateral branches that formed at the base of the leaves and 2 branches that forward on the lower set of leaves.